Plus, anybody who subscribes to our channel will get an alert now that says we're online. And it's always good to wait and see if we get the required number of viewers. Actually, Jess or Glenn, you want to go check that it's actually on LinkedIn and is on YouTube?
I'll check LinkedIn. YouTube's up.
Cool. Oh, no, I just got a notification from LinkedIn telling me it was going. Look at that. The future. Oops, now I'm getting feedback loop. All right.
I can tell my favorite StreamYard story.
Do it.
So this was sort of back in the early days of lockdown when we were all suddenly making that shift to virtual, and all of the companies were really sort of ramping up their product. And apparently StreamYard used to have this UI thing, which is that if you clicked the duck, it would quit the stream for everybody.
Yeah.
And so, of course, when you have that kind of feature, what you have to do is tell people on the stream, don't click the duck. And of course, when you tell people on the stream, don't click the duck, you basically get as far as don't click the duck, and then somebody clicks the duck. And then that's the end of the stream.
Awesome. Nobody clicked the duck.
The only thing I want to do is click the duck. It's the only thing don't think I've wanted anything more. Damn you, duck. Stop looking at me.
Does anyone ever watch a program called Taskmaster?
Oh, I've heard of it. I've definitely seen it.
It's Greg Davies. He is the Taskmaster, but it shows actually arranged is the brainchild of a guy called Alex Horn, who's his sidekick. But anyway, they get celebrities to do so it's a whole series, the same 5 celebrities, usually comedians, and they have to do these like weird tasks. One of the tasks they had to do was they had to follow instructions that are on the table, but one of the items on the table was a big red button which said "Do not press." And of course, they didn't show us anything. But at the end of it, they said, "So who pressed the button?" It was all 5 of them who pressed the button.
Of course.
Yeah.
What to say? Oh, it says we have 2 people watching already. If you're watching, hello. We'll be beginning in 10 minutes, just waiting for people to show up because we only just kicked off the stream now. If you're watching in the future, we'll put a link down in the comments, which will be a direct leap to when we actually start talking, probably around 6:15. So you don't have to sit through all this. You could just skip to 6:15 or 6:15-ish, 15 minutes in.
The discussion about not pushing the duck is going to be the best bit, though.
Yeah, you will miss some quality.
Matt, how you doing? Hey, evening all.
DevOps representing.
Matt, while we're ramping up, have you got any London DevOps stories to regale from November 30th, or anything you wanted to shout out around December?
That's true, actually. If you've got dates, we do give you a shout out. So if you want to shout out, pop in the comments your next meetup. That would be really handy. Oh yeah, you just pointed out, Jess, in the WhatsApp. Yeah, the LinkedIn viewers don't show up here. It's like the API for LinkedIn is rubbish. Like if we write here, it doesn't show up in LinkedIn, and LinkedIn it just plays the video essentially. That's it. So we need the occasional, and I guess this is you, Jess, to respond to comments there and let us know.
I'll jump in, emote.
As our social media expert.
Hashtag, like, no, people don't do people use hashtags anymore? I haven't seen one for a while.
You'll take a route.
Yeah, well, we should be asking you that.
I'm going to go with a no, but I mean, to be fair, I think we need to chat to Sam about our use of TikTok, because I think he's now had 2 OWASP London meetups there, right? And by now he's got, yeah, I think we had one with last month with Ashish and
Shilpa.
someone else. Yeah, Shilpa with Shilpi
Oh,
with, and
Sonia,
there was someone
yeah.
else with a really interesting project on CVSS, like dependency context scanning. It's sick, and plus their offices are just ridiculous, like as you'd expect from a massive social media company.
But the irony is heavy, you know, like TikTok's like kind of a known potential security issue, and yet you hold your security. I mean, I like it. Do it. Let's do a meetup in China. Why not just do that?
The call is coming from inside the house.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's one of those approaches where if you decide to just go straight, you're just like, right, I'll just use WeChat, and I've decided that China can have all my information. You're just you're choosing where your
Radical
breach is happening.
transparency.
Yeah, exactly.
That was a that is how you cure security and put us all out of a job.
So Matt was saying that the OWASP meetups, because of TikTok, now only last 30 minutes or 30 seconds, and I filmed shaky portrait mode. There's probably a lot of pointing as well.
Nice. I want to see Sam do a dance.
These dances are hard. I was hanging out with one of my friend's daughters recently, and we were trying to film a TikTok for her amusement, and she was obviously cringing and we were looking ridiculous, but those dances are very difficult. I don't know if anyone's tried a TikTok dance.
Obviously, Glenn has.
Hey! I thought you were just about to launch into one. No, it's cool.
So I spend most of my weekends.
Oh, TikTok's just one of those things I've never really got into. Thank God.
Holly, have you dipped your toe into TikTok?
Considered it, and then looked at how much information leaked and thought, maybe I'll just stay old and not do it.
Yeah, I remember that.
Being interactive.
So I assume, Matt, when you say you floss, you're talking about the dance and not that you've got great teeth hygiene.
I don't think you want to see either.
Matt has excellent dental hygiene, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's too much information to know.
It's not dental hygiene, it's mouth security.
Ooh.
Excellent. I can't follow that up with anything. I think that's it. Thanks everyone. Good night.
You could throw an acronym on it. You could have MSPM, Mouth Security Posture Management. We could have a Gartner Magic Quadrant for it.
The more you spend on your dental hygiene, the better your teeth are doing. Yeah. As not to go full podcast, but there's an excellent story today in one of the RSS feeds that hooked my brain up to. It was and that's what the UK Home Office is ignoring the risk of catastrophic ransomware attacks. And they stated that we found the Home Office's public output on cybersecurity ransomware to be almost non-existent and has been dwarfed by its focus on small boats and illegal migration. The government appreciated the report and clarified that it won't diminish the Home Office's role as a primary department in fighting cyber threats against the country. So, fear, amusement.
They're still getting ransomware
it's just, now. I think in the chat, marks out of 10. How screwed are we? That's,
If anybody's watching that works for the government.
Shall we do
Only
the thing?
5 minutes. Are we going to start early?
Could step into the slides or
look at the slide. What am I circling? Intros at 6:15.
No, you're right. Sorry. That's fine.
I mean, I don't know. Considering we start every live one late, we could start this one early.
That would really throw everybody.
The offset program.
Never let them know your next move.
Someone is making a noise that sounds
What is
like
that
a
noise?
cheese grater.
I'm going. That's Glenn again. As soon as you looked up, it stopped.
Well,
There it is. Oh, he muted. There we go.
Yeah, I like the sort of the guilty expression and the mute button.
Yeah.
I just keep muting it when I'm not talking. So
I was on a stream the other day and we had something that sounded like a chair squeaking. And I think it possibly was that like the microphone was so sensitive that just the normal sort of, slight shiftings of someone who's talking on a chair was enough to make little squeak, 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 squeak noises. It was really weird.
My chair does a squeak. The worst thing Glenn and I ever had was a podcast we did where somehow we did not notice the entire time. Some dude was he clicking a pen? He had a nervous twitch, like right by the microphone.
Oh,
You can't edit that out.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and it wasn't until we listened back that was just click, 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 click. We're like, oh my god,
how did we miss
How did we
that?
miss
Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't even a satisfying click or an ASMR click or even like a reassuring metronome throughout the thing. It was like a surprise little
Super
staccato.
random.
Just
Like, someone just
Yeah, there's no rhythm
Yeah.
to it. No.
No, it was harsh. Yeah, see, only got 3 minutes left. All right, anybody else got any stream podcast horror stories? Are we that good?
podcast horror stories. The one that I've just been listening to is someone's been podcasting their journey in like trying to refurbish an old Mac and talking about the fixability, repairability of tech. It's been quite interesting because you've been hearing like weird soldering and just like fans. It's between the kind of explanations of what's going on and the sort of like iconic Apple noises. It's been a lot of sound effects. It's a Foley artist stream. Anyone got any favorite podcasts of late?
Oh, Trevor Noah just released a podcast with video. He just did one with Sam Altman, which was really good. About the fire hire that just happened.
Did they talk about it openly?
Oh, straight up, yeah.
Really?
Right after Sam Altman goes, I probably shouldn't talk about this. Boom. So it's quite good. You can see that on Spotify. Spotify does video podcasts. I saw that and I was thinking we should actually maybe start doing our video, with the exception of I do not want the process of uploading video. That's the heavyweight task that my internet can't handle. But it might be cool. We're going to be going officially. Oh,
yeah, there was that little bug on Spotify, wasn't there, where they I can't remember exactly what it was, but they were trying to incentivize podcasts, and so they were driving people to podcasts, and so loads of people were just uploading blank podcasts and still getting paid for it. I'm mangling this story. I can't remember. There was something that was interesting about the story, but
I like the sound of it though.
Yeah, I think there was those I think it was kind of linked to people like doing like SEO, almost gamifying of like track names, but they found out that you could get more profit from doing that within the podcast category, I think, right?
Yeah.
And then like releasing like 12-hour silent podcasts and getting Hey, as Risky Business says, it's not dumb if it works.
True. I think we're at 6:15. We've done it.
Woohoo!
We can begin. Hey, normally who normally starts? Is it you, Glenn? Glenn, you can do it.
Okay. So welcome to I was just about to say DSO Overflow. It's not, is it? It's welcome to DevSecOps London Gathering, our Christmas or our last event of the year. So as you can see, we're all virtual tonight. We're on YouTube and we're on LinkedIn. And for those of you watching in the future, we obviously were on LinkedIn and we were on YouTube, and you found us. So welcome to you as well. So tonight we've got this meetup with to talk about Tame Microservices with contract testing with Holly Cummins, and we'll introduce Holly a bit later. But in the meantime, here's us. So there's Steve, Jess, and Frankie and myself. Frankie can't join us tonight. She's at a Christmas party, her work's due. So it's just the three of us with Holly. If you want to get in touch with us, that's how you get in touch with us, with our LinkedIn profiles there. And I think some of us still use Twitter. I don't use it as much. I've still got a handle, but don't read it that much. So moving on. If you want to get in touch with us, you can do so quite easily. We've got loads of methods. The best option is to email us at team@dsolg.com, and any one of us will pick that up, and we can answer your queries. But we also have a website, our meetup, which is where all our meetings are organized, on LinkedIn as well, where this is being hosted, and also on YouTube. And as I alluded to earlier, we have a podcast. Next slide. The DSO Overflow podcast, which is a monthly podcast. We try to sync it with our guests, so that our guest at the London Gathering is our speaker for one of the next episodes of the Overflow. We've got some other guests as well that are up there. So please do check it out on your favorite podcast platform.
Oh, this is over to Jess. Jess is our shout out captain.
Hello, I am. So we are a meetup that exists within an ecosystem of other meetups, and we often attend each other's meetups. Some of the other organizers come to ours. Usually this is a slide where we have a really fun thing where we get at least Sam Stepien from OS London standing up and shouting out his next meetup. Matt Saunders is in the chat. He's just had his last session on the 30th of November. London DevOps is having a Christmas break, but they should be back on January 18th. Good shout. I feel like everyone is, there's like a general sort of simmering down for Christmas. Coding Back Females are having their Christmas event on tonight as well. And I think Ladies of London Hacking Society had their last event of the year last week, I believe. But we'll put together a little roundup and send it out in the event chat.
Oh, this is me, isn't it?
Yes, and for anyone wanting some like podcast continuity, if you check the speakers notes, Steve.
Me?
Yeah,
This?
Yeah, I've got your line from Sysdig in the speakers notes. Check it out.
Oh, you do? Okay, I'll have to check it out. Anyway, we have all of this wouldn't be possible without our wonderful sponsors. The first of which, of course, is Sysdig, Shift Left and Shield Right, a cloud data protection platform to stop container and security attacks. They have an awesome open source project called Falco and Sysdig. Go check it out if you want sort of a gateway drug to Sysdig. I would be remiss if I didn't say this is actually where I work, Prisma Cloud, securing applications from code to cloud. Go check them out. And of course, finally, this slide didn't load. I knew it was going to happen, but I'm going to click show anyway. Apiro, our final major gold sponsor. Fix faster, prevent risks that matter, prioritize with code to runtime context, and get comprehensive real-time visibility with Apiro. All of these are great security vendors. I recommend checking out all three. And yeah, let's move on. I'm going to hand this back to Jess.
So if you want to become a speaker, a number of our awesome members have spoken this year. It's been really cool to see people go from doing a quick lightning talk, testing out their ideas, to kind of having a main session. We had a great one from Amit earlier on in the year over at Just Eat. Shout out to Dida from Ladies of London Hacking Society for being our venue sponsor for that one. And we also had an excellent one with Paul Schwarzenberger, giving some real like actionable tips. But if you have like a talk idea brewing in your head, scan the QR code, complete the form, and let us know about it. We'd love to hear your pitch.
And I'd say get in there quick, because we are already starting to fill up for 2024. So some of our meetups are already available on the meetup platform, but yeah, we're filling up. So if you do want to speak at one of our events, then do get in touch with us as you can, really.
And our next date, January 17th, live at Veracode again. So put that in your calendars, 6 p.m., the right way to shift AppSec left, DevSecOps without the noise. That all sounds like we could all benefit from that. And from there, I mean, that's a very long intro on that slide. But we could instead just hand directly over to Holly at this point. Holly, are you ready?
I am. Yep. Let me just get my slides sharing.
Yep, I will wait, and then I will pop
Cool.
that up. You good to go?
I'm good to go. Yeah.
Boom.
Cool. Thank you. So as the very long intro said, I'm Holly Cummins. I work for Red Hat. I'm a senior principal software engineer at Red Hat, and I work on the Quarkus team. But I've been with Red Hat for about a year and a half. And before that, I was with IBM, and I've done a bunch of things with IBM. But one of the roles I've had is as a consultant. And when I was a consultant, I was fairly senior in the team, so I sort of ended up being in that firefighting role, where if a project was troubled, I'd be the one who would get on the plane and then go look and see what had gone wrong. And many years ago, I got on a plane, and then when I got off the plane, the first thing the team said to me was, every time we touch one microservice, all of the others break. And this was the first microservices project I'd done. And I thought, I'm fairly sure that's not what all of the articles about microservices say. You know, the idea of microservices is supposed to be that you become more insulated from stupid things they do in the other team, not that you end up with this really brittle system. But there's a problem that a lot of the early discussions about microservices didn't really address, which is, how do I actually know my microservices system, the whole system, works without getting bogged down into doing end-to-end testing and always testing everything together? Because if I end up having to assemble everything just in order to get any kind of basic validation of my code, I may as well have a monolith. That was the whole point of microservices, was that I didn't have to do this. And there's a really nice heuristic for looking at a microservices system to see if you're doing it right. And you don't even need to look at the code or anything like that. All you need to do is look at what's been deployed and look at the version numbers. If the version numbers of what's been deployed are all exactly the same, that's a pretty good indication that we don't trust these things to deploy independently. We don't have confidence in our testing, because if we had confidence in our testing, we'd be deploying these things at their own cadence, and so we, maybe have some things that are moving really slowly and some things that are moving fast. That's really one of the sort of the value propositions of microservices, is that you can have this different pace of development for different components of the system. Because otherwise, if you don't have that, all you really have is the ability to scale different services up and down, which is kind of useful, but probably not worth the price that you pay for microservices. And as I mentioned, this deploying in lockstep, it's really a reflection on our testing. If the only way we can get confidence in an individual service is to test it with everything else, then of course we're not going to deploy it independently. Of course we're going to deploy the tested unit, and the tested unit is the whole system. And really what I see with a lot of organizations using microservices is that there's a huge dependence on end-to-end testing. And end-to-end testing has a whole bunch of problems, but fundamentally it's usually really, really slow to do. And so it's frustrating for these teams because they have this enormous bottleneck in their process, even though supposedly microservices were supposed to get rid of that bottleneck. And what I often see going back, not quite at the DevSecOps yet, but certainly at the DevOps side, is a lot of teams don't have that confidence in individual testing, and they want to deploy everything together. And to ensure they deploy everything together, they lock all of the pipelines together so that it's actually physically impossible for an individual microservice to go through a pipeline and end up in production. And that's a real shame. And again, it's a real anti-pattern if you end up in this situation where you have your pipeline enforcing the release of everything at the same time. On the other hand, the alternative can be worse, because you definitely don't want to just test the individual microservices, go, hey, this individual microservice seems to work, let's deploy it. Because if you do that, then you end up back at the situation I was in at the beginning, where every time you deploy one microservice, the whole system breaks, which is just, I mean, it's catastrophic. The business will not accept that. And this, I think, is a surprise to a lot of organizations, because we kind of imagine when we move to microservices, and when we read the microservices articles, they all say, oh yeah, microservices make you decoupled. But actually that's not true. Microservices make you distributed. Distributed and decoupled, they both start with D, so they kind of sound like the same thing, but they are definitely not the same. And distributed comes with a whole bunch of pain. And what we sort of find when we peel back the connections between the microservices is we find that they're going over HTTP or whatever, but there still is a lot of coupling. And so then problems happen, because a service maybe behaves in a subtly different way to what the consumer expected, or what a huge cause of problems in that first project was typos. And of course, as developers, if we see a typo, what are we going to do? We're going to correct it. But every time a typo got corrected, that then meant that all of a sudden the consuming services didn't understand the payload anymore. And so in order to correct a typo, you'd have to have a big typo correcting meeting and get everybody together. And you can see sort of more subtle problems as well. And a lot of these then end up in areas where maybe the normal happy path tests won't cover it, and maybe the OpenAPI spec won't really cover it well enough. So for example, if you query for something and the something isn't there, should that be a 404 or should it be a 204? Both are semantically okay, but if you expect a 204 and the other service gives you a 404, your fallback code's not going to work correctly. And all of these problems are really things that mocks just will not address. And I think as well, I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a software engineer. I can't lay any claim to be a security expert, but I think it doesn't take too much imagination to sort of make the leap from we're having these miscommunications between services to these miscommunications are potential vulnerabilities, and we're not correctly detecting the things that our security testing probably should be testing in an automated way, just because the system has become so distributed. So, of course, all of us try and avoid end-to-end testing as much as possible. We all try and test the smallest possible unit, and to do that, we rely on mocks. And so the idea of a mock is that we have a conversation with the other team, we agree what the interface looks like, and then when I want to test my code, I make a mock that looks like what it's supposed to look like. So when that happens, the tests will pass. Until, what if their code doesn't actually do what they said it did? Then at that point, my tests still pass, but unfortunately, what's in production is going to be broken. So let's have a quick little look at that. So I have a demo. This demo, let me get it up. I was at a talk about a contract testing framework called Microx just on Monday, and so he had a demo, and his demo, my demo, you will see is my demo is all about sweaters and buying a sweater. His demo, he was French. His demo was all about pastries. This demo drove me absolutely mad watching it because it was, I'm going to order a millefeuille. I was just getting hungrier and hungrier. So hopefully this demo is a little bit kinder to everybody. So the basic scenario is I have an online sweater shop. Let's make that big. And I want to go buy a sweater. So let me try it out. I would like to buy a white sweater. And that was completely disappointing, but not for the reasons that I expected, which just goes to show. There we go. I don't know what happened the first time. So I do my order, and it goes to my BFF, which is a cold person because it's the best friend forever. And it comes back with a connection refused exception. What's going on? Well, I've got my BFF stood up, but I don't have anything else stood up. So in order to get a sweater, you need someone to knit that sweater. So let me start up the microservice for that. I should say as well, I'm running all of this on Quarkus because I work for Quarkus, but this isn't specific to Quarkus, and it's not even specific to Java. You know, these are quite universal principles. So if I've got my knitter service up, and so now if I order a white sweater, okay, I get a little bit further, so you can see the architecture diagram sort of coming through here. So I pass my white order to the knitter, but then it still comes back with a connection refused exception. That's because to knit a sweater, you need wool. Where do you get wool? You go to the farmer to get wool from the sheep. So the last service that we have is the farmer. So let me start that service over there. And then if I go back here and if I order a white sweater, hooray. Okay, so I've now got the whole flow. So the knitter goes and it passes in a shear the sheep service request, and then it gets wool back, and you can see we've got worsted weight wool, and then it gets turned into a long sleeve jumper, and we're good. Hooray. But that was already kind of annoying and kind of hard work just to do this really trivial system with 3 services, and a realistic system is going to have a lot more than 3 services. So that's part of the problem, but there's worse problems, because if I go back to my farmer service, you can see I've got like a wool resource here, and so it's listening on this path, and it gets the color from the order, and then it tries to find the right sheep, and then it returns a skein of wool. And if I look at my skein class, I've got a Java record. So skein, by the way, is a specific word for a hunk of yarn, a package of yarn. I don't know why I use this word, because I don't think many people who aren't keen knitters know it, but there's another problem with it. At least skein is internal, it's not exposed. But there's another problem with this API, which maybe is exposed, which is, of course, we're in London. I used the correct British spelling. Not everybody in the world uses that spelling, so maybe I want to make my API a little bit more familiar to our colleagues in the US. So let me do a refactor. So I do my refactor to change that to color, and then it will have changed that, and what's being used here is as Jackson object mapping. So when I change this field name, what's in the JSON changes as well. And if I look at my tests, I've got tests because I'm not a maniac. My tests have rerun. They're still passing. So everything is good. Successful refactor. Until if I go back here and I order a sweater, the flow goes through okay, but something's gone wrong. My new sweater is not a white sweater. My new sweater is a totally undescribable sweater. Sad lambda. This, by the way, is the best pun I've ever come up with because it's got lambdas for computing and sad panda, and you get wool from lambs, and it's just highlight of the demo. You can stop here. But if I go back and if I look at my my JSON, it goes in color white, and then it comes out color white. And this is the kind of error that actually, if I didn't have the visual of it, I could stare at that for a day going, why doesn't this work? Why doesn't this work? It looks correct. And it's that really sort of subtle problem, like, you know, that you wouldn't necessarily notice, but it means we don't know what color the wool is. So then when it goes to the knitter, we don't know what color the wool is, the color's null, and then the whole flow fails. So this is kind of a trivial example, but I think it shows the sort of problems that you can get really pretty quickly with this kind of system. So, that was not what I intended to do. So this is where contract tests come in. What a contract test does is it gives you some linkage between the mock that you use and the validation for the other team. So it's not a live linkage. It's not like an end-to-end testing, which is good because it makes it lighter. So for my code, the contract test acts as a mock. For their code, the contract test acts as a functional test. And so then we get a pretty good assurance that if all of the tests are passing, probably things are going to work. And if they change their behavior in some way, then their tests are going to break because they've got that contract test in place. And similarly, if I start calling the API in a different way, my tests are going to break. And it's useful, I think, to think about this in terms of where it sits on the test pyramid. So the sort of the normal hierarchy of the test pyramid is that at the top we have the end-to-end tests. They're awesome because they give us really good confidence, but they're annoying because they're expensive to write and expensive to run. At the bottom, we have unit tests, which are awesome because they're so cheap to write, cheap to run. But the only problem is they don't necessarily give us very much confidence that the thing actually works. There's huge categories of problems that just don't get caught by end-to-end tests. And in the middle, we sometimes talk about integration tests or that kind of thing. But in this context, I think it's useful to think about contract tests in the middle. And contract tests are kind of cool because they actually give you a lot of the confidence of end-to-end tests with a lot of the cheapness of unit tests. So they're not just in the middle, they actually sort of span both of those characteristics a bit. And there's a really nice analogy to contract tests in the world of fire alarm testing. Because if you want to test your fire alarm, the way to give you the most confidence that your fire alarm works is to set your house on fire. And then as you're stood on the pavement, you hear the beep, 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 beep from inside the house, and you know your fire alarm works. But it was very, very expensive to test your fire alarm that way. So the fact that you know your fire alarm works isn't really the point because the cost was too high. So instead, what most of us probably do is there's a button on the fire alarm. And if you push that button, it goes beep, beep, beep. That gives you really good confidence that the fire alarm is capable of going beep, beep, beep. That might not be enough. So I have a fire alarm in my kitchen, and sometimes depending what I'm cooking and how badly I'm cooking it, I can fill the kitchen with smoke and the fire alarm's not going off. And I test it and it goes beep, beep, beep. But I actually have no idea whether the fire alarm's just really clever and is able to distinguish between fire and my cooking, or whether something's wrong with the smoke sensor. And so what a lot of institutions will do is they have, you sort of see someone walking around with this kind of thing, and it's like a cup on a long stick. And the little person comes up and they sort of put the cup around the fire alarm, and then they release a puff of smoke into that cup. And then they can see if the fire alarm goes beep, beep, beep. So it's not as good as testing the building on fire, but you are testing that linkage that you really care about between smoke and beep, beep, beep. So there's several different frameworks for contract testing. The one I'm going to show is PACT. That's kind of the de facto standard for, certainly for consumer-driven contract testing. I work in Java, but PACT is polyglot, so in fact, I've often used it to check the connection between my front end and my back end with the front end JavaScript front end. There's also bindings for C#. I think it originally came out of the Ruby world. Pretty much anything you're going to use, there's a PACT binding for. And so the consumer defines the contract, which acts as a mock for the consumer, and then it's used to validate the provider. So let's see what it would look like in this case. So let me go back to my knitter. So PACT is consumer driven. That means that the knitter in this case is the one who's talking to the farmer, so they define the contract. And so I've got some unit tests for my sweater resource already. And what they do is they inject a mock, and the mock is automatically generated, and then they define some behaviors for the mock. So when I ask for wool, then return me a white skein of wool. And I can be lazy, and I can take this same structure for my contract test. So I will call it my contract test. And I get rid of this mocking code because that's where the difference is. And instead, what I do is I define a pact. And so a pact is just a JSON file. And here I'm using a DSL, a Java DSL, to define the pact. I could also write it by hand. The other thing I need to do is add the pact libraries to my POM. So I'm going to do that with the Quarkus CLI just because I can. So if I do that, then it's updated my POM. And now if I go back here and refresh, then everything resolves except for that one. So let me resolve that. So you can see at the moment, this is a lot more verbose than just that inject mock I had before, because I have to specify everything. I'm hoping for the Quarkus, Pact is a third-party library, but I've been working on Quarkus support for Pact, and so I'm hoping to get a bit of Quarkus developer joy into this and to make this a lot shorter, but I need to fix a few other things first. So the other thing that I need to do is I need to add a few annotations to say I'm going to hook into the Pact JUnit support. And what am I trying to test? I'm trying to test the farmer. I expect the farmer to live on 8096. So with all that, then my tests have run and they're passing. And the main excitement is that if I go here, I've got this JSON file. So you can see why you maybe want to use a DSL rather than writing it by hand. So far, all I've got is a mock. But what I now want to do is get that contract to the provider, because that's where the link comes. You can do this in a few different ways. If you're using Pact have a broker, so you can publish contracts up to the broker. That gives you a lot of extra things like being able to see what versions have been tested with what and that kind of thing. Another thing that teams might do is they might publish the contract into the provider's source control. In this case, I'm just going to copy it across on the file system because this is all running on my laptop. So if I do publish contracts, then it just copies the contract over to the farmers. So then if I go over to my farmer, if I go to my wool resource, then what I can do is I can make a new test. So I'm going to make a wool resource contract test. And this test is a lot simpler than the consumer test. So let me just paste that in. So you can see again, I'm saying this is a test for the farmer. I am a farmer. Here's where my contracts live. And then it's using a template. So it's saying, here's where to find my application in the before. And then could you please just take everything that's in that JSON file and run it? This is obviously not working at the moment because I need to add the dependency. So I can do Quarkus X add Pact provider. And then with that, then cool, my tests are passing. So although my tests shouldn't be passing really because I've made a typo here. So let me just rerun the tests and see. No test found. Normally it will just keep rerunning the tests, but of course, same as everything. If it doesn't do quite what you hoped, stop it and start it again. And okay, cool. So you can see now it's correctly failing. It's identified that I've got a mismatch and that the colors aren't spelled the same. So now if I go back, and there's various ways I could fix this. I could have a negotiation with the consumer to say, hey, we're going to go to the American spelling. But in this case, I'm just going to take the path of least resistance and do the refactor. And then if I do that, then my tests are passing. So it's caught the problem and it's allowed me to resolve it. So now if I go back and why is it doing that? If I go back and to my slides, the source code for the demo is here, but we can also add that into the notes. With Pact, because you kind of know that you're trying to do a contract test, a lot of examples end up defining the mock and then checking how the mock behaves on the consumer side. You don't need to do that. It's a mock. You just defined it. You should be using that mock to test your code, same as you would any other test. And unfortunately, it's quite easy to show testing the mock, and it's quite hard to show a meaningful test of your code. So a lot of examples get this wrong and they end up testing the code. So don't test the mock. That's not what the mock is for. So this is an example of consumer-driven contract testing. So the idea is that the consumer defines the contract, and then that's used as a mock for the consumer, and then they share that contract to a provider who uses it with contract tests to verify themselves. So this has some really nice features. So it potentially gives you quite rich semantic testing. So you're not just testing the shape, and I'll come back to that. A more fundamental benefit is probably that the provider can develop what's needed rather than just providing every endpoint in case someone needs it. So it's quite a nice fit with TDD flows. But if you're using something like OpenAPI and you've invested in developing OpenAPI assets, your JSON is going to your packed JSON is going to duplicate some of that, which is kind of not ideal. And the provider needs to know who their consumers are. You need to have that relationship between the provider and the consumer to get the contracts. So like if you're Netflix or Spotify or something, you have no idea who's consuming your APIs. So maybe this model isn't ideal. And another thing that can upset people about this model is that the consumer, because the consumer defines the contract, if they put a new expectation in and share that contract, it can break the provider CI. And some teams are really uncomfortable with that. Now, of course, I always think if you're not comfortable with your consumers breaking your CI, wait till you see what can happen in production, because it's going to be a lot worse than a broken CI if there's a mismatch in expectations. Failing early is a good thing. It's a feature, not a defect. But teams have to be comfortable with it. So I mentioned that if you have OpenAPI assets, they can't really be reused. So what some teams like to do instead is called provider-driven contract testing. So this really gives you a way to leverage those OpenAPI assets and has other benefits. So with provider-driven contract testing, as the name implies, you start with the provider. The provider generates their contract. Often that would just be an OpenAPI snapshot of the current implementation. Once you have that contract, you can then use it to verify your provider, which if you just generated the contract is kind of like marking your own homework, but over time, this may be less trivial because you can check for drift. So you can use tools like Schema Thesis, or you can use Microx for that validation. Then what you do is you give your contract to your consumer. So then you get that same function where your contract can be spun up to act as a mock for the consumer. So this has some advantages because you don't need to learn Pact or anything. You already know what your contract looks like. The provider doesn't need to talk to the consumers. It's up to the consumers to just find the contract. But a disadvantage of this is that the provider doesn't know how their API is being used. So if you have something in your API, you're never going to get contracts from the consumers to tell you that it's being used. So deprecating can be harder. There's another problem, which is with the spec-based tests, like you can test the shape of it. So something like an OpenAPI validation totally would have caught that color issue. But there's a whole bunch of more subtle problems that an OpenAPI test just would never catch, and you probably want to be testing them. So this is a bit of a religious debate. People have strong opinions. For me personally, I find consumer-driven contract testing more valuable, with the caveat that for some contexts, it's just not going to make sense if you have a lot of consumers. So you get that deeper testing. It helps you preserve backwards compatibility because you can do the cross-version testing. But it also really supports YAGNI, which is you ain't going to need it. So you don't need to develop every endpoint if people aren't using it yet. And there's a related acronym, which is less well known because I just made it up, which is YAWIBNIGITSI. I don't think it's going to take off in the same way YAGNI has, because, well, the reason's fairly obvious. So YAWIBNIGITSI stands for you already wrote it, but now can safely delete it. So that's really that deprecation use case to say, hey, in version 1, I was full of optimism and joy, and I put this in, and now I've realized that it's really hard to maintain, and I don't think anyone's using it. Am I okay to remove it? If it's in your OpenAPI spec, it's hard to remove without doing sort of a version dance where you insist that everyone upgrade. But if you have the contracts, that maybe tells you that actually you were wrong, no one uses it, and so you can get rid of it. So let's have a look at some of those deeper problems that maybe OpenAPI testing wouldn't catch. So if I go back to, yay, found it. Okay, so far I've been ordering white sweaters. What if I want to, I'm just going to get rid of that top one that happened when it was behaving weird. So if I reload, no interaction. So I can order a white sweater. I can also order a gray sweater. And it goes through, and I get a gray sweater back. I can order a black sweater, and it goes through, and I get a black sweater back. I can order a brown sweater. It goes through, and I get a brown sweater back. I can order a pink sweater, and it goes through, and I get a white sweater back. That wasn't what I was hoping for when I ordered a pink sweater. What's going on? What's going on is that I think there's probably a fault in my whole system design, which is that I don't have any logic for dyeing, as in dyeing colors, not. And so when the farmer gets an order in for a color, they just go find the sheep of that color and shear it. There are no pink sheep. The farmer does not have pink sheep. So when the pink order comes in, it just does a fallback and sends back white, which means the order isn't fulfilled properly. And there's probably a conversation to be had between these teams about like what the right solution is. Do we want to add in a dyeing service? Do we want to just have a failure instead of a fallback? But at the moment, we don't even know. If we hadn't done this manual testing, there would be nothing in our system to tell us that there was this mismatch in expectations between I can order a rainbow of colors and if it's not on a sheep, you can't have it. So let's go back to my contract test. So in my DSL, I said that I'm saying that my body is just going to have a string with color. But let's make it a little bit more specific. So this is the body of the request. Instead of saying I just going to pass in any string, I'm going to say I'm going to pass in a specific string, and it's going to be white. And so now if I look at my tests, let me just force the rerun. Yeah, so that is still passing. But I don't want to test the white case. I want to also test the pink case. So ideally I should copy everything, but I'm going to be a bit lazy, and so I'm just going to change white to pink, and I can replace everything, and then I should find, again, just force the rerun. Yep, everything is still passing. And again, this isn't too surprising. I've changed my mock to say, if I ask you for a pink wool, give me pink wool, and then the rest of the system works fine. But let me publish my contract. So if I look at my contract now, you can see it's changed to say, okay, the request specifies pink, and I expect pink back. And so now let me publish that contract again. And then let me go to my farmer somewhere. Okay, so I've got my farmer. Quarkus will pick up a lot of file system changes. It won't pick up the contract change. It's another thing on my to-do list. So let me force the rerun of the tests, and I've got a failure. And the failure is exactly what I expected, which is if I ask for pink, I get white. So the previous failure, I could just undo the refactor to fix. This one's probably a bit more subtle what the fix is, because the farmer cannot find pink sheep. You know, that's not going to be the fix. So either we have to have a conversation about failing earlier, or we have to put it in a dyeing service and then remove this expectation from the farmer. But at least now we know we have the problem. So, nope, and that has once again, cool. And really this is about semantics versus syntax. So I always have this in as a backup in case the demo completely fails, but hopefully this is all exactly what you saw already, which is that it doesn't work. And really the point here is that when we think about the relationship between two systems, two services, we can't just look at the syntax. We have to be thinking about the semantics, about how they behave under various conditions. Now you may be saying, this was a totally unrealistic demo because it should be really obvious that you couldn't get pink sheep. You know, that's not something that you needed to do testing to discover that there's no such thing as pink sheep. You say that, but look, this is the Latitude Festival. They have pink sheep. So it is a realistic demo, sort of. And you can get a lot of other problems as well that may be flushed out. So I won't show the demo for this because it just gets too complicated to follow. But a while ago when I was working on this demo, I had a problem because when I tested for something that wasn't there, the provider returned 204. The contract, which was the mock, expected a 404, and so it didn't work. And so I asked a colleague who had worked on the code and was like, why isn't this working? And oh no, if in Quarkus, if you pass null back on a REST endpoint, Quarkus will turn that into a 204 for you. And then my colleague went on to this discussion about the theory behind REST and when you should do 204 and when you should do 404. And at this point, it was 11 at night and I was in Denmark and I had a demo to do the next morning. I was like, I do not care. Please, I appreciate your help. Now, please shut up. I'm just going to update the expectations in the test to match reality, which is, of course, something that we've all done, right? Like, I don't like reality, but fixing it is hard. So let me just change my expectations. And so I thought I was done. But then what happened was another test started failing. And it was because I changed my mock, but that mock has the linkage to the provider validation. And so it started failing to say, hey, look, no, this isn't actually how the provider behaves. So it saved me from just fudging the tests to kind of make things work. So I mentioned Pact is a very popular choice. It's not the only one. So you have a few options if you want to do contract testing. There's Pact. Microx is really, really cool. It's a lot of investment. It's Postman have acquired that team and it integrates really nicely with Kubernetes. And it also integrates really nicely with Quarkus, and they've just put in a test container support and that kind of thing. So if you want to look at the provider-driven side, Microx is cool. Microx also has much deeper support than Pact for non-REST protocols, so things like async, things like gRPC. If you're in the Spring world, you can use Spring Cloud Contract. I think Pact is better personally. Or of course, you can just use OpenAPI and then add in little tools for the schema validation and the mock generation. So you can use Prism for the mock generation and Schema Thesis for the schema validation. So then the next question is, okay, this sounds awesome. Why aren't I doing this already? Why isn't everybody doing this? And I think there's a few reasons. One is this stuff isn't easy. So I've seen a lot of teams start working on contract testing and then find it's hard. And particularly every team that starts ends up testing the mock. Don't test the mock. But also, I think it can expose some organizational problems that maybe are going to be a lot harder to fix, and you need to fix those first before you go into the contract testing. So I mentioned that the consumer can break the provider CI. If that's not okay because the communication has broken down, that needs to be fixed first. Another potential thing that just makes it not very rewarding to implement is it comes in really late in the cycle. So we've already invested in all of our end-to-end tests. We've already invested in all of our unit tests. We've got open API, we've got mocks. And so adding in contract testing feels like duplicating some of that effort. So you probably do want to be doing it for maximum reward earlier. It won't completely replace mocking. It's not the right tool for that. But if you do it alongside, then you can choose what goes where more sensibly. And with that, that's it for the demo. That link is a version of the slides, and it's also got a link to the source code. And I think we've got some time for questions.
Thanks so much, Holly. Really appreciate you not only taking us through contract testing, like the benefits, the pitfalls, but also the revelation that pink sheep do exist.
Most important conclusion of the demo, clearly.
I was going to say, yeah, I was getting towards the end of your presentation. I just kept thinking about, cool, yeah, what do we have to lose? And then you kind of spelled out, this is incredibly hard. This is incredibly difficult. What sort of pitfalls have you kind of seen when this has been implemented, when contract testing has been implemented? Has it been that just go for it?
Yeah, no, I think a lot of it is the ones that I did cover on those last 3 slides. Like the reward is too small because it comes in too late, or teams just get angry at each other, or just, that it's too hard. And then I think, probably it is worth doing a bit of investment in the skills at the beginning to sort of, do the pair programming or do the mentoring or sit down and say, don't test the mock, don't test the mock. You're testing the mock.
What are we've got one question from Rohit Sharma here, which I think is I think everyone's kind of thinking about what sort of security benefits can we kind of see here?
Yeah. And I think this is something that I was sort of thinking about before this session. And I think a lot of it has to do, particularly with the packed side, with that deeper testing, that you're not just testing the shape of it, you can test the behavior. Beyond that, I end up slightly sort of waving my arms and saying, I'm sure you could do stuff. And that in general, of course, the links is going to be one of the vulnerabilities. Testing those links has to help. But beyond that, waving arms. I mean, for both of these, though, there's such good questions. And every time I meet someone who's using contract testing, I kind of ask them, okay, so what did you find that was hard about it? Or, when I meet people who have tried it and then sort of said, oh, okay, yeah, but we had problems. Okay, what was hard? Because I really want to be, I'm not involved with Pact, but I use it and I've been working on the support for it for Quarkus, and I want to be trying to see like, okay, well, can we in the Quarkus team do things to lower these barriers? So I ask them what the barriers are. And I think it's the same with the security question of like, okay, yeah, how is this helping you with your security posture? Because it's just got to, but I don't know the examples.
Yeah, there's a huge industry around API testing and fuzzing and inputs, et cetera. And I can't help but feel this kind of testing is going to give you a huge leap in that direction for sure.
Yeah, like I think with the API testing, you don't have that connection, and so then you're still not having the sort of quite the same thing of, okay, well, if this comes out of this, then it's not. Sorry, that I've just completely failed on myself. On my sentence.
Don't worry about it. No, we'll get you on the podcast. Don't worry.
Yeah.
How did you learn about all this? Because I mean, I'm familiar with intent tests, I'm familiar with unit tests, and I'm drawing like a completely new to contract testing. So where did you find out about it?
So for me, it was on that first project where someone else on the team said, this is out of control, this is terrible, and introduced Pact. And so then I sort of saw the immediate connection between the problems that we were having and the problems that it was fixing. But I think if you're paying a lot of attention in Sam Newman's microservices book, he does talk about contract testing and Pact a little bit as well. But you're right that it's not super widely known. And again, that's one of those things the questions that keeps me up at night of, is it not super widely known because it's not as valuable as I think it is? Or is it just that we need to be doing a better job as an industry of sharing this knowledge and saying, hey, this is really useful, and this technique has introduced, the microservices technique has introduced a whole bunch of new problems, and we need to not be naive about them, and we need to introduce a new testing technique to sort it out.
Yeah, definitely leaning towards the latter, because I think it's the associated pain with testing that sometimes leads us to probably not put as much thought, effort, and support into making sure that it's a scalable practice within like the organizations that we work in.
Yeah, you're totally right. And there's like in a lot of organizations as well, it's in the sort of the really bad case, it ends up being siloed. So you have the QA team and they worry about end to end. So then, in my microservices bubble, I can just work on my microservice. And if QA tell me it's a problem, then I can just blame the other end because my service works as designed. So you do end up with these kind of pathological patterns where people don't have an investment in the whole system, and people have completely outsourced even the thinking about quality to the QA team. And then I think that also then ends up relating to some issues around status as well, that we sort of associate testing as a low status activity, and the real high status stuff is writing the service, and let someone else clean up the dirty stuff. And I think that, again, as an industry, we're starting to move past that, but we need to work more on moving past that and saying this is the most important thing, and if you can't test it, you shouldn't be writing it.
No, definitely. I think that the point that you made towards like the slight sort of shift left within the, well, I mean, I feel like I'm bringing that up. I don't think I talk about shift left with enough like understanding of what that truly means. Does shift left apply to testing? That's a
I think so.
Very dumb question to ask the actual people that know a little bit more about it than I do.
Yeah,
Always.
I think shift left applies to anything that you don't want to be doing. That usually happens later in the cycle. So it perfectly applies to testing. Sorry, Steve, I talked over you.
No, that's fine. I was just very simply saying definitely all forms of testing are good shift left. Totally. That's why this belongs here on DevSecOps, even though it's not directly security. Contract testing is a huge connection with availability, resilience. It's perfect.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you there, Steve. I think also from the security perspective, if you've got any uncertainties, unknowns within your whole infrastructure, you do have the potential for security breaches, security leaks. So contract testing is a way to actually make sure that you out those unknowns and turn them into knowable unknowns that you can actually sort out. Because before then, they're just unknowable or unknown unknowns, I guess.
Yeah, and particularly on the error paths, I feel like that's where often our normal testing doesn't cover, and particularly if there's a mismatch between the error paths, like the 204, 404 thing, and then that's when you can get those vulnerabilities creeping in.
For sure. There was a question in the chat, and it seems obvious, but I'm going to throw it up there. It's on the screen now. Caleb said, what ID were you using? And I'm going to say why.
So that's the JetBrains IntelliJ idea. And so the reason I use it is because they give me the Ultimate Edition free because I'm a Java champion. And so but having said that, actually, it was a switch because I had been using Eclipse for Java and Visual Studio Code for everything else. And I hadn't realized how painful these kind of switches are. So I switched to IntelliJ, and for about a month, I would tell anybody, that my life was terrible and I hated everything. And then I finally built up the muscle memory, and now I really, really like it. But it was, you see why people get sort of so attached to things, because the cost of switching is high.
Definitely, they're the small kind of decisions that we can kind of make, like even if we don't have ultimate autonomy. I think this is kind of like came from like one of our last meetups. We was talking about the sort of like role of autonomy in your day-to-day role, and if you can't kind of exercise that within the sort of code you write, at least you can exercise that on where you write it, and even exercising that in small ways can form kind of a bit of your identity.
Yeah. Although cross-browser compatibility still isn't where it should be in terms of, the formatting standards. We don't have a universal formatting standard that works between IDEs. And there's the one, is it IDE config? There's the one that's supposed to, but it's not deep enough. It doesn't actually cover the things that are going to end up causing churn. So we, as an industry, we do still end up with, I think, at least some team lock-in on IDEs because of formatting, which is such a stupid reason to get locked into an IDE, because it should be the most solvable problem. But then there's lots of problems that should be really solvable. So now I've depressed everybody.
So I've been such a long time since I coded. I was still using Notepad, writing ASP.
Oh God.
I have done that, but
that's a solvable problem.
Yeah, I gave up development. Okay.
If there's no more questions from are there any on LinkedIn? Jess,
No.
you're monitoring.
I think we've covered off Rohit's main kind of question around like the sort of what's being used for security test of code, which I took a wild sort of interpretation of that question. But Rohit, if you're still tuning in and I've taken the wrong read, then message now if I haven't told you.
That's too late.
It's gone. But yeah, I think that's all of us on LinkedIn. I think we've covered off YouTube. So any other questions from the floor here?
No, I'm pretty good. I'm saving some of the ones I wrote down for the podcast. So I want to keep it fresh. So I think this has been great. Holly, thanks very much for coming on to DevSecOps London Gathering. This has been incredibly informative because I knew nothing about contract testing.
Hooray.
It's the plethora of questions I'm going to save for later. We will be, if you're watching in the future, meaning not live, go check the show notes because we'll be asking Holly for lots of links for everything she talked about. So if there's anything you were curious about, you can just go down there and click and learn more on your own. And plus, I've done lots of Googling while this has been on and learned various other links that I can add to the notes as well. Otherwise, when's our next meetup? January 17th? Live at Veracode?
Live at Veracode. Click RSVP, make a pact to attend. That's all I have. That's all I have, sorry. It's all in Google right now. But yeah, thanks so much for joining us, and just thanks for being with us on 2023. I think this is us closing out the year, isn't it?
It is.
All right,
and
excellent.
Just two takeaways, right? Don't test your mocks, and your binigizkdi.
Yeah. You remembered that. Okay.
I can't read in front of me. Okay.
All right, excellent.
Right,
Holly, we can let you go.
Thank you, Holly, and Merry Christmas,
everyone.
everybody. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Cheers for your time.
You all.
Bye-bye.